My name is Scott Ritter. In the first episode, I told you how Volodymyr Zelensky came to power, who he really is, and who recruited him. Everyone knows that agents are given tasks. Zelensky is no exception. However, in his case, it's more like obligations, debts that cannot be ignored, like a deal with the devil. Over the course of 4 years of presidency, he has accomplished or brought to fruition at least 10 important tasks. Each of them, to varying degrees, has contributed to the destruction of Ukraine. Today, we'll examine all of them in detail. So task number 1, to eliminate the Russian language. What's not understandable, why is English and not Russian the second language in Ukraine? Can you explain that to me? Are there many English Americans or Australians there?
However, what is happening in Donbass today is an attempt of the Western Ukrainians, Galatians, and those who are anti-Russian to carry out ethnic cleansing. This presents a real problem, and this aspect is often silenced in the West.
Another obligation of such type to Western handlers was task number 2, to finalize the church split. The term Moscow was a significant hindrance for the Ukrainian authorities to pray. That's why they created their own church with blackjack and their own tomos. The head of the OCU, Serhiy Epiphanius Dominko, started receiving frequent visits from American guests. In 2019, William Taylor, charged the affairs to Ukraine, came to meet him. And in January 2020, former CIA Director and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo paid a visit. The purpose of this visit will be revealed by him a bit later.
I made sure the U.S. supported international recognition of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine.
After that, there was a meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The meeting's schedule resembled that of a foreign affairs minister. Americans used Zelensky to complete the division of Ukrainian Orthodox believers into the right and wrong factions. The ambition, and Volodymyr Zelensky continues to train his persuasive skills in his speeches.
Today, another step has been taken to strengthen the spiritual independence of our state and protect our society from old and cynical Moscow manipulations with religion,
as it was in the 1940s under Hitler. Rewriting history has become the third task for Zelensky. Victory Day on May 9th was replaced with Europe Day by the president of Ukraine. If he remains in power a little longer, I am certain that Ukrainians will start celebrating July 4th, the Independence Day of the United States, together with us. I've witnessed how everything Russian is being canceled in the West with the start of the special operation. Flags, poets, artists, musicians, they've all been banned. I am convinced that this was a planned campaign. The same thing happened in Ukraine, and it became another tool of division.
I want to remove Lenin and instead put someone who will be admired by everyone in the country. It's called literary characters, definitely not politicians. What's stopping you? Bulgakov? Ukrainian? Ukrainian. If you want to rub it into your neighbor, put up Gogol.
Gogol, Bulgakov. Under President Zelensky, Bulgakov was officially labeled as Russophobic, and his memorial plaque was removed from the wall of a university in Kyiv. Writer Nikolai Ostrovsky, who apparently came from Ukraine, didn't satisfy him either. Scientist Mikhail Lomonosov, writer Maxim Gorky, and finally, Alexander Pushkin. The great writer was the one who offended Ukrainian authorities the most. But what about freedom of speech and the media? It was precisely this issue that the head of MI6 discussed with Zelensky during their face-to-face meeting in London. There, Zelensky was given task number 4. On February 3rd, 2021, 3 Ukrainian television channels, ZIK, News 1, and 112 Ukraine, were shut down. The decision was made by the National Security and Defense Council under Zelensky's order, of course. A year later, Zelensky fulfilled another obligation. Let's call it task number 5. He banned the opposition.
Certain political parties' activities are suspended at the time of martial law.
The sixth goal Zelensky was tasked with was to turn Ukraine into a testing ground, not only for weapons, but also for experiments on people. In 2005, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA, was established in the country. It is a pet project of the U.S. Department of Defense, and one of its tasks is to study biological threats, including deadly viruses and bacteria.
The intelligence of the Donetsk People's Republic has previously reported on research activities involving American military specialists. Research took place in a closed laboratory located in the village of Shelkostansia. It is situated 30 kilometers from the city of Kharkiv. According to our information, the leakage of the California strain of deadly influenza occurred precisely from there.
From this day onwards, Ukraine turned into a petri dish. Outbreaks of cholera, hepatitis, and botulism were recorded here. Foreign specialists in the areas of plague, cholera, and hepatitis left Ukraine. Instead, the country was filled with soldiers of fortune. However, these guys have been welcome there since the days of the Maidan. This became President Zelensky's seventh commitment. In 2015, the orbital operation was launched. It was a British training program for the armed forces of Ukraine, conducted, of course, in accordance with NATO standards. In 2016, Ukraine and the United States signed the Concept of Development of Partnership between the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and the Department of Defense of the United States for 5 years. In 2019, under pressure from the Ukrainian diaspora, Zelensky became the first president to officially recognize the Plast movement in Ukraine through legislation. It has now become the primary educational structure for young Ukrainians, funded by the state. This is just one aspect of Zelensky's bloody agreement. Let's call it task number 8, the legalization of Nazism. A few years ago, neo-Nazis caused outrage in Western media. However, today, Nazism and fascist insignia have become a fashionable trend. Swastikas, SS symbols, and the Totenkopf skull have become a norm. Even President Zelensky posts photos of them on his social media accounts. So it turns out that the good Nazis are the ones who hate and kill Russians and fight against Russia. For these actions, the US and Western Europe seem to forgive all of their sins. Most likely, you haven't heard about it. The TV channel cut out the journalist's question and Zelensky's response. A Jewish president should not respond in such a manner about those who rob and kill unarmed people. We remember, the main thing is the picture. Western partners even overlooked the fact that the president of Ukraine and his associates robbed their own army and the supplied weapons. They want to offset the expenses through Ukrainian land. This is Agent Zelensky's 9th task. Fertile lands represented interest even for Hitler. The Ukrainian constitution even has a separate article dedicated to Black Earth, or Chernozem.
Even during my time there, in the central office, I heard that the same Monsanto Corporation set its sights on the entire south of Ukraine, from Odessa to Mariupol. During the conflict, it seemed to me that over 30% of major Dutch corporations were present there. Land was actively sold to companies like Cargill and other global corporations that were operating in the region. Foreigners and companies with foreign founders will be able to purchase Ukrainian land only if the consent of the Ukrainian people is granted through an all-Ukrainian referendum.
Spoiler, there was no referendum. In July 2021, the moratorium on the sale of land was lifted. Yes, foreigners do not have a formal right to buy land, but there is a loophole. Technically, Ukrainian companies under foreign control can make purchases. But why should we be concerned about it? Land in America is fine.
This soil is located in Europe, not in the US. If it is removed from the food cycle, Europe will have much less chance of being self-sufficient and acting independently. And that's why there is a plan to reduce Europe's food security in order to better control neighboring countries. The U.S. doesn't need the grain, but they need control. And control comes only when you control food security of other countries. I may turn out to be a bad prophet, but I am confident that as soon as peace is established in Ukraine, the flow of dollars and credits will stop. And instead, we will be grabbed by the throat on all fronts, demanding the repayment of these debts. Nobody will care that Ukraine is currently incapable of repaying its debts. It simply cannot. Its debts now exceed our gross domestic product significantly.
In May 2022, Biden signed the Lend-Lease law. This means that Ukraine started receiving weapons and equipment on credit, just like the Soviet Union and the United Kingdom during World War II. Agreeing to this plunder became commitment number 10 for Zelensky in this deal with the devil. The president of Ukraine called it a historic step. I would call it a leap into the abyss. Do you know when Russia repaid its debt to the U.S. for Lend-Lease? In 2006. It took them over 60 years to repay the debt. Ukraine already owes the European Union $132 billion, which is 90% of its GDP. Even freezing payments will not allow the economy to settle its debts on time. Meanwhile, the country is experiencing rampant inflation. Food prices have risen by 26.5%. The poverty rate has jumped from 5.5% to 24%, affecting over 7 million people. The country has lost 1/5 of its territory. And, most importantly, hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost.
He ran as a peace candidate. He turned around and betrayed that. And what's always astounded to me is that how he manages to keep so many regular Ukrainian boys going into this war to get themselves killed in a war that they simply cannot win, and yet they keep going. Just in Bakhmut, by the way, the Ukrainians lost more men than the United States lost in the entire Vietnam War.
So the rights of millions of citizens have been trampled upon. Ukrainian men are being sent to the front lines to be slaughtered like sacrificial lambs, snatched right off the streets. The Russian language and culture have been practically eradicated. The canonical church is on the verge of being outlawed. The country has been turned into a safari for foreign mercenaries and a testing ground for bloody experiments. Agent Volodymyr Zelensky has accomplished the tasks assigned by foreign intelligence agencies. The question is, will those in power still need someone who knows too much and wants too much?